Some of you actually may know me from the past 9 years of organizing, starting with marching against the war in Iraq as a high school student at Stevenson High School in Buffalo Grove, all the way through to working for A+ Illinois for education funding reform all across the state to get off our dependence on property taxes, to working as the field director for Democracy for America to elect progressive candidates up and down the ticket all across the country. And in my latest role at MoveOn.org as the mobilization director, working to pass real healthcare reform with a public option, as well as to save and elect a lot of progressive candidates all across the country. And in October and November, I actually spent the final 2 weeks working tirelessly to help save Russ Feingold's seat. And unfortunately, that didn't work out so well. But what I'd like to do today is actually take a step back and tell you a little bit about who I am, where I come from, and what that leads me to believe about the direction of the Democratic Party and the country as a whole. My journey to this point actually starts out about 2 decades ago when my family moved here as Jewish refugees from the former Soviet Union. We came here in 1991, and my folks had pretty much every advantage you could hope for as immigrants to this country. They had a good education, they had a profession, they had youth, and the idealism that I think comes with it almost invariably. And they also had a work ethic that was pretty much unmatched. And when they got here, they did work hard. My father had a PhD, but for a time he delivered pizzas all across Chicago to make ends meet, as so many immigrants have done. My mother was a professional in her own right, but she raised 2 kids, myself and my older sister, and also took care of my elderly grandmother, all while learning English and getting ready to enter the workforce in her own career. Over the years, over the past 2 decades, my folks worked their way up from our cramped motel room in Chicago to apartments in Skokie and eventually to houses in Buffalo Grove, where we live to this day. They started 2 small businesses. They put both their kids all the way through college, and they lived in their chosen careers and they worked in their chosen careers. In every sense of the word, they lived out the American dream over 2 decades. And yet there's one other thing they did that I'm forever grateful for. And that is, every step of the way, they made clear that they couldn't have done it alone. That it took the help, despite all their hard work and perseverance, it took the help of a community and a government to help them achieve what they did. When we were getting started, they had help from the Jewish community in Chicago, through volunteers from groups like HIAS, who guided them through the federal bureaucracy, helped them get a visa to get here in the first place, and also even helped them get a bridge loan when times were tough. And despite what our Republican friends may think, our family got help repeatedly from both the state and federal governments. When we were getting started, we went on public assistance for a while. We got food stamps to put food on the table. We got welfare to help pay the bills. Later on, when either of my parents or my sister lost their job, we got unemployment insurance to help pay the bills. We got COBRA coverage to make sure we had health care when we couldn't have it through work. When I turned 15, my parents did what most parents do. They told me, get a job. You have to help pay for college. So I went to work at the local Jewel Osco in Buffalo Grove, where I stayed for 3.5 years, and only because of my membership in the United Food and Commercial Workers was I able to work 10 or 15 hours during the school year, and then 30 or 40 during the summer. Because organized labor bargains for the collective bargaining rights of all its members. And that's what gives us opportunity in this country. Later on, I went off to school at McGill University in Montreal to study political science and U.S. history. And of course, to do that, I got a student loan backed by the federal government. And to this day, I have a 93-year-old grandmother living in Long Grove, Illinois, up in Lake County, who relies on Medicare and Social Security every single day. You see, at every step of my journey, when my folks risked falling backwards or needed a helping hand to make it to the next plateau, our community and government was there to help us out, to lend a helping hand. So that's why I'm thinking of taking the step and jumping into the congressional race in the 10th Congressional District. Because when I hear Sarah Palin or John Boehner or my Congressman Bob Dole talk about raising the retirement age to 70 or beyond, vote to cut off health care reform and health care benefits to up to 30 million people, when I see them organize in Wisconsin and over 20 other states to take away bargaining rights from workers for fair wages and good working conditions, when I see them try to defund Planned Parenthood and to pass a continuing resolution and a budget resolution that cuts the very core services that make our communities possible, things like home heating assistance, like education benefits, like having cops and teachers and nurses and firefighters. I know that these things are worth fighting for. These community services are the only reason I can stand here before you today. And I think those things are worth fighting for, and I'm sick and tired of the Republican Party step by step demolishing the very foundation of the American dream. But if I'm to be totally honest with you, and I think this is a good, honest crowd, I'm also sick and tired of a Democratic Party that chooses to walk into a room and pre-compromise, to walk into a room and pre-triangulate, to walk into a room and negotiate with themselves before they even see what's on the table. The truth is, the late Senator Paul Wellstone had a saying. He said, at some point, if you refuse to fight for what you stand for, you got to realize you don't really stand for it. And it's time we had a Democratic Party that actually stood up for the progressive values that'll make a real difference in people's lives. So what does that mean? Well, there's a lot of issues we can talk about, and surely we'll have plenty of time to discuss them. But I want to touch on 5 quick ones that I think really make up what drives me to take this step. The number one priority for this country, and I think all of you will agree, is jobs. After the last election, when the electors across the country and the voters sent a clear message that we want help on the economy, the Democratic Party still had nearly 2 months in charge. 2 months to pass a jobs bill. They didn't do it. Instead, we saw tax cut compromises. We saw a deficit commission talk about Social Security. And I'm sick and tired of that kind of Democratic Party. So here's what I want to see. I want to see a Democratic Party that'll actually introduce and pass a jobs bill, a real jobs bill, that'll extend unemployment insurance beyond 99 weeks for those drowning without work. They'll provide state and local aid to states like Wisconsin and Illinois to stop them from having to lay off firefighters and teachers and cops and nurses and stop them from having to reverse the effects of the Recovery Act at the state level. I want to see a jobs bill that actually uses federal funding to put people back to work, to build the infrastructure of tomorrow, to build mass transit systems like the one Governor Walker rejected in Wisconsin, to build a new green economy all across the 10th Congressional District. And the final piece of that is it is time for the Small Business Authority to do its job, to have a green energy jobs bank and actually loan directly to small businesses so that they can create jobs right here in the United States of America. We spent $800 billion bailing out the banks just a couple years ago. And the deal was, we'll bail you out if you use that money to give loans to small businesses to put people back to work. Well, they got the bailout. They didn't put anyone back to work. Instead, they hoarded the money. They used it to buy up other banks, to save. Well, where are the jobs? Well, they're not here. And the truth is, we already have a small business authority empowered to make these loans. We just have to compel them to do it, to put people back to work. Now, beyond jobs, the second piece that I want to see from the Democratic Party is a real investment in our communities. And the only way we can afford that right now is to immediately bring an end to the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. These wars, Pakistan, Yemen, all the places where our military is overextended and fighting wars that shouldn't be fought. The truth is, there are still 50,000 forces in Iraq. And even with President Obama in charge, it is our responsibility to call for them to come home. And it's also our job. That's right. The other piece of that, of course, is we are spending billions of dollars every single month on a quagmire in Afghanistan that has to come to an end. We need to bring those billions of dollars and those thousands of U.S. troops back home to rebuild our communities. So instead of investing in destroying bridges in Baghdad and Kabul, we can start bringing new economies to North Chicago and Waukegan and Buffalo Grove and Highland Park and all these places across the 10th Congressional District where we can pass Buy American laws and actually put people back to work starting right now. Now, the third piece that I want to see from the Democratic Party is a real commitment to health and retirement security. Now, you hear a lot of talk about Social Security from the other side right now. They like to tell us that it'll be running short on money in 2 or 3 decades. Well, look, if you ran a small business that was going to be running short on money in 2 or 3 decades, I think you'd be pretty happy. That's one of the most, Social Security is one of the most successful social programs in the history of the country and the history of the world. But it's true. In a couple of decades, it's going to start running short on cash. And there's one obvious solution to it. It is unacceptable that somebody who makes $106 million right now pays as much to Social Security as somebody who makes $106,000. All you have to do is get rid of the cap on Social Security, and you will fund it for generations to come and guarantee real retirement security for every single American, including my grandmother, my parents, and my generation. Now, the second piece to this is healthcare reform. Now, many of us were, over the past 2 years, engaged in the big healthcare debate and come out of it with mixed results. 30 more million people will get coverage in a few years. But of course, they'll get it from the same health insurance companies that have been trying to kick us off their plans, trying to deny us benefits, and trying to cut off coverage every step of the way. We have 25-year-olds who can finally stay on their plan. We have preconditions finally covered. And yet, at the end of the day, we know that real health security for every American can only come one way, through expanding Medicare to cover every single American. The only way that we can guarantee we can bring down costs by making sure that everyone's included in the same system. And at the same time, having coverage that doesn't come from private providers, but from a government that we trust, and from health insurers and from health providers who are competing against each other but still paid by a single payer, the U.S. taxpayer, whose single interest is providing for the health and well-being of the American people, not trying to make a quick buck. So that's what we need. Jobs, investment, health and retirement security. But there's two other issues I'd like to touch on, in part because as I've started off this effort, lots of folks have told me not to talk about them, so I figure I just will. So one of the biggest embarrassments, to be honest, of the Democratic Party over the past few years is that the last president to propose real comprehensive immigration reform was George W. Bush. In the end, it was killed by the right wing of his party. But the truth is, it is a democratic value to let new folks enter this country. You know, the irony of the situation is my parents didn't realize that they were lucky to be born behind the Iron Curtain, because then they could apply to move here as refugees. Because the truth is, if they had been born in Mexico or Central America or South America, I have no doubt for 1 second that they would have crossed that border to provide a better life for their kids. And so when I look at a student at Waukegan High School who's got the grades, got the will, got the desire to go to college, but can't do it because he can't get any student loans or grants, I know that's wrong. And I know that it's time for the Democratic Party to pass real, comprehensive immigration reform that will provide a pathway to citizenship for every single one of the 12 million folks living in our midst, going to our schools, going to our places of worship, working alongside us, driving on our roads. They deserve to be citizens, and that's all there is to it. And let me just add, from my Democratic friends like Senator Schumer and like Representative Gutierrez, we do not need a national biometric ID card in the process. We've gone 2 centuries without national identification papers. I don't think we need them now. The 12 million folks in our midst are some of the most people we want most in this country. They've crossed a desert. They've lived through all these things to provide a better life for their family. And gosh darn it, this is America. We should provide them a pathway to citizenship right now so they can live out their hopes and dreams and aspirations right here in the United States of America. Now, the final piece of why I'm thinking about jumping into this race is because I believe firmly in my heart that we cannot have a country where we treat over 10 million of our fellow citizens as second-class citizens. And so I will commit this to you today. If I enter the race, and if I am lucky enough to be elected by the residents of the 10th Congressional District, in my first term, I will work with members of our community, with allies all across the country, to introduce a Civil Rights Act for the 21st century that provides over 1,000 rights, benefits, responsibilities, and privileges to every single LGBT American in our midst. You know, over the past 2 years, we've made a lot of progress. We've seen President Obama stop defending the Defense of Marriage Act, but it's still the law of the land. We still don't have federal recognition for marriages performed in Massachusetts and many other states. Over the past year, we saw the passage of the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. Yet we still have to wait for the military establishment to certify that it can become law and to make sure they're fully comfortable with the consequences. We've seen progress on ENDA all across the country, and yet in nearly 3/4 of states, you can still be fired from your job simply for who you love. And we've seen the president take a great step to allow hospital visitation so you can visit your partner in the hospital when they lay there dying. But the truth is, a piecemeal approach like that just won't work. If we see President Palin or President Romney or any one of the Republican candidates take office, they can reverse that executive order on day one. And that's not something we can allow to happen. And it is time for the Democratic Party to reach back to our best values from the 60s, the Civil Rights Acts we passed, the Voting Rights Act we passed, and to introduce a similar Voting Rights Act for the 21st century and pass it and go across the country and campaign for it, from California to Massachusetts to Illinois to Iowa, and to make a case to the American people that it is time for full equality for every single American. Now, these are just 5 issues, and I'm going to stop in a second and hopefully have a conversation about all the other issues that might be on your minds. But the thing that ties all these issues together is a core progressive idea. And I quote the late Senator Paul Wellstone a lot, and I'll do it again, because I think he enunciated this idea better than anyone else I've ever heard. That the truth is, politics can be about more than just big money and power games. It can be about the improvement of people's lives, the pursuit of justice, peace, and equality in our time. That's what brings us here together in the middle of March. That's what compels people to take a trip up to Madison to protest with workers who aren't even in our own state. That's what compels us to knock on doors and make phone calls. The belief that there's something greater than ourselves, that we can come together and use the political process to actually make a difference in folks' lives. That's what compels me to think about entering this race. The core notion that we can still come together around the shared progressive values we believe in and fight for them every single day. We can stand up for them. We can campaign on them. We can go door to door for them. We can make phone calls for them. And that bit by bit, we can bring the American people along to our cause. And so where I am in the process right now is, as Bill mentioned, I launched an exploratory committee for Congress about 2 weeks ago in the 10th Congressional District. And I'm traveling all around the district and the Chicagoland area to engage in a real conversation about what it is we believe in as Democrats and as progressives, and if we're willing to go out there and fight for it. And so I look forward to answering questions, to having a conversation. I hope you'll visit my website, which is ilyasheyman.com. It's ILYASHEYMAN.com. I also have some forms here that I ask you folks to fill out. But the core goal we've set for this exploratory campaign is to identify 500 supporters and find $100,000 in pledges to show that this is a viable campaign. Because the truth is, and all of you know this from all the campaigns you've been involved on, that running a bold progressive campaign for Congress is a tall order. At every step of the way, we're going to be met by the same entrenched special interests, the same Democratic Party establishment folks, as well as just the same folks who have become cynical about the political process, as they rightfully should have. And so the core question I'm trying to answer in my travels all across the district and all across the Chicagoland area is whether folks are once again willing to set that aside and to say that we are willing to believe again that progressive change is possible. We're willing to work for it. We're willing to knock on doors for it. We're willing to make phone calls for it. We're willing to reach into our pockets for it, because that's what it'll take over the next 19 months to build a real grassroots campaign for change that can win in the 10th Congressional District and send a message to Washington, D.C. that we are tired of the same old politics and we are ready to stand up and fight for the American dream. So thank you, and with that, I'll take some questions.